Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records, and I don't love saying things like, oh, John Lennon would have loved this, oh, John Lennon would have loved that, but I know for a fact he would have loved my shirt this week. So welcome back, or welcome, if this is your first time here. I wish I could wear the tiny glasses all episode, but it's just too much with the glare. I'm Abby, and Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If TV show length episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. This week's episode is special for 3 reasons. Number 1, it is the first time I have covered a solo Beatle album in 2 years. 2, this is the first time I'm covering anything Beatles related in over a year. And 3, this is our last episode before the mid-season special. I know, it snuck up on me too, but expect that as your episode next week, and remember, the mid-season special and the season finale are always related. Last month, I went to Chicago to see the MCA's Yoko Ono retrospective. It assured me this was absolutely the right time to cover this album, as I'd intended when I sat down and planned this whole season. This week's album is John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band. Yes, Yoko put one out as well. It looks almost identical, but believe me, they are very different projects, and that is a story for another day. Congrats if you guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my posts tab. That's where I post the hints to what the next album is gonna be. I make announcements, I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written versions of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. This is a real heavy hitter we have on our hands this week. We have no time to waste, so let's take the plastic off. So my copy of Plastic Ono Band is a repress. This is an import copy from Canada in the 1980s. This was a gift from a subscriber and a neighbor of the not so far north. Now let's talk about this cover art. The Plastic Ono Band, or I should say John's Plastic Ono Band cover. Again, there are 2 Plastic Ono Bands, and they look almost identical. Both Plastic Ono Band covers were photographed by Dan Richter in the garden at Tittenhurst on an Instamatic camera. It doesn't get much more lo-fi than this. It probably looks perfectly clear to you, or in the tiny square on a streaming service, but when I look at this up close, you can definitely tell this was shot on a consumer-grade point-and-shoot camera. Since the light source is so strong from the upper left-hand corner, you get this kind of vague look of the leaves as the light shines through them, and I love what happened with the color on this tree branch. You can see the texture of the bark, but because you've blown this image up so far to put on a 12-inch by 12-inch album cover, it looks really flat. You got John right here under the tree, leaning his head on Yoko. The easiest way to tell the Plastic Ono Band albums apart is to look at the back cover. John's has a baby photo of him. Aw. Unfortunately, I don't have all the extras that originally came with Plastic Ono Band. They've been lost to the sands of time, including the original printed inner sleeve, with the album credits and an assertion that the censoring of 2 f***s on Working Class Hero were, quote, omitted at the insistence of EMI. On this Plastic Ono Band album, we have John Lennon on lead vocals, guitar, piano, and serving as principal songwriter. He's backed by Klaus Voormann on bass, Ringo Starr on drums, hi Ringo, and a couple special guests. 5th Beatle contender Billy Preston plays the piano on God, Yoko Ono plays the wind. She didn't literally play a wind machine, she just contributed to the atmosphere of the album, as John later explained. Plastic Ono Band was produced by Phil Spector, who also plays the piano on Love, produced by John and Yoko. Roll transition. 1970 must have been a crazy year to be a Beatles fan. Paul McCartney's in his Reputation era. George Harrison is having the time of his life. My Sweet Lord was inescapable, and Ringo, he's just being Ringo. The best is yet to come for him. As for John Lennon, in order to understand why John feels the way he feels and what he's doing right now in 1970, we have to pull back a little bit. Quote, "From 65 on, I was sort of vaguely looking for somewhere to go, but I didn't have the nerve to really step in the boat by myself and push the boat off. He wants something more, but he doesn't know what more looks like yet." Paul takes over as de facto frontman, and John does not take kindly to this, even though he wants to explore what life beyond the Beatles looks like. Classic John hypocrisy right there. George and Patty bring transcendental meditation into the fray, Brian Epstein dies, the Beatles go to the Maharishi's ashram in Rishikesh. John writes "Look at Me" at the ashram, along with a lot of other revealing songs. He's suffering from insomnia, he wants to die. And he's fallen in love with avant-garde artist Yoko Ono. Quote, "When I met Yoko and then fell in love, it was, my God, this is different from anything before. This is something other. It's more than gold. It's more than everything. It's more than." John saw what his life could be, and he could not go back to the way it was before. This was who he was, right? He was 100% in on this one thing. Everything else was in the background. Thus, John leaves his wife, Cynthia, for Yoko, very public divorce, and further checks out from the Beatles. Quote, "That old gang of mine, that's all over. When I met Yoko is when you meet your first woman, and you leave the guys at the bar. Maybe some guys like to do it every Friday night or something, and continue that relationship with the boys, but once I found the woman, the boys became of no interest whatsoever, other than they were like old friends." John and Yoko did everything together. This is peak John and Yoko. They lived together, they ate together, they went to the bathroom together, and used heroin together. Yoko starts attending recording sessions, and John starts participating in her art. In October of 1968, in the midst of the incredible White Album show, the police in London are obsessed with busting up pop stars using drugs. It starts with Donovan, moves up through the Rolling Stones in 67, and finally we've reached the Beatles in 68. In October of 1968, Ringo's apartment is raided, and John and Yoko are arrested for possession of marijuana. The irony was, they were using heroin. This is a PR nightmare that not even an unhinged press release by Derek Taylor could fix. Yoko was off heroin, but the stress of the arrest caused her to miscarry, just days before the White Album's release. At the same time as these legal troubles, Yoko and John are embroiled in a very messy custody battle with Yoko's ex-husband over their daughter. Quite plainly, 1968 was one of the worst years of John's life. Some of this he brought upon himself, some of it was inflicted upon him. I believe this was the year that triggered the avalanche that led to Plastic Ono Band's creation. Another media storm comes in the form of Two Virgins. The never-ending spectacle that was John and Yoko were a constant fixture in the papers, and their wedding was no different. They got married in Gibraltar near Spain, and their honeymoon was the bed-in. Does seem silly by our current standards of activism. They had a maid come in and change the sheets, like, come on. But you have to see the concept of the bed-in through a 1969 lens. Yoko came from Fluxus, the unofficial son of Dada. Dada was a response to World War I. These artists thought that if the horrors of war were rational and good, then they'd counter that with irrationality and randomness. So you can see why the children of World War II. John was born into one of the worst bombed cities in England, and Yoko witnessed the bombing of Tokyo through her bedroom window as a child, you could see why they would respond to this idea and conceptualize their activism around this stance. Like the Yippies were born out of deliberate irrationality, Fluxus was born out of randomness. It's the art of the moment, which can never be replicated. If the near constant coverage of Vietnam is like a commercial for war on TV, then why not do this? A commercial for peace. As for the Yoko of it all, she's a severe, uncompromising personality and a complex character, to say the absolute least. I wrote 2 whole podcast episodes about Yoko over the summer in which we unpack all of the baggage that comes with her, and believe me, it is a lot. Why else did people not like Yoko? Well, she screamed. I don't know about you, but I find that grating. Again, coming back to the context of 1969, she was this strange, older Japanese woman who'd stolen a precious Beatle away. She was called a Dragon Lady, a Jap, some even worse names. For all of these reasons and more, the general public were just not up to the challenge of Yoko, let alone with John. What happens when you try to split up a couple in their honeymoon phase? They dig their heels in. This is exactly what John and Yoko did, and they absolutely courted the controversy. In retrospect, John said, quote, "We've learned to come in sort of gently. We can't come smashing in like, 'Hi, it's John and Yoko, naked in bed with flags, and Yoko screaming and him playing wild guitar in the back.'" I'm sorry about that. My George impression is way better than my John. We're just coming in through the back door. During all of this, the Get Back project, John felt Paul was keeping the Beatles going purely for his own sake, and I think there's a grain of truth in that. We see it when George leaves the band in Get Back. Paul was terrified of not being a Beatle anymore. This was the only thing he knew. Then there was the manager thing. Apple Corps was a disaster. John met Alan Klein at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. He was the one who brought Klein in. Him, George, and Ringo all agree that Klein could be their new manager, but Paul dissents. He wants his new in-laws, the Eastmans, to do it. Were the Eastmans and Paul right to be suspicious of Alan Klein? 1000%! But the more the rest of the guys said no to the Eastmans, the more Paul said yes. This is just like the world saying no to John and Yoko, which only made them say yes. Meanwhile, during all of this, in March of 1969, the Beatles' music publisher Dick James sells his shares in Northern Songs to ATV behind the Beatles' backs. The guys put their differences aside and do a fair amount of groveling to George Martin to make Abbey Road. This comes out in August. In July, John and Yoko get in a car crash in Scotland. This further inflamed issues between John and Cynthia, as their son Julian was in the car, and Yoko's injuries left her bedridden. Unfortunately, she miscarries a second time. In September, once the couple has recuperated, John and Yoko are tapped for a rock and roll revival festival in Toronto. Chuck Berry and Little Richard will be there. So will lots of drugs. So John puts together a last-minute Plastic Ono Band, with Klaus Voormann on bass, Eric Clapton on guitar, and Yoko. The set was bonkers. I'm so sorry, Yoko. I much prefer your singing on Approximately Infinite Universe. Pause. Okay, so what was the Plastic Ono Band anyway? Yoko had this idea to have tape recorders and radios play in plastic stands, and they would be the band playing music at one of her avant-garde concerts in Berlin. The plans at Berlin fell apart, but she told John about the idea. And he goes, "Oh, like this?" And he took some plastic implements that had toothbrush or whatever, all these little ones, and just put it together and said, "Like this? This is Plastic Ono Band." Basically, the Plastic Ono Band was an imaginary band. Anyone could be in the Plastic Ono Band, even you. This was in line with Yoko's Fluxus art of the mind, and audience participation. And this would play nicely with John's want to not be in another f***ing band. Or worse, a supergroup. The Plastic Ono Band could be whatever he wanted it to be. It seems John had gotten the final push to leave the Beatles' nest and go far out. Before flying out for Toronto, John tells Alan Klein he wants a divorce from the band. The guys agree to keep it on the down low until April of 1970. Insert the Let It Be McCartney release kerfuffle here. Paul releases an interview with himself in which he effectively breaks up the band. John wasn't mad that Paul did what he did. He was just disappointed he didn't think of the stunt first. It's kind of brilliant. When asked how he felt about the breakup in the moment, John said he didn't remember. I was in my own pain. The Beatles broke up after Brian died. Now let's zoom out again, because what is Vinyl Monday if not zooming out and in a bunch? Think of the state of the world in 1970. The political violence of 1968, the Tate LaBianca murders and Altamont in 69, Kent State, the Black Panthers, the draft. John wasn't alone in feeling like the world might be headed toward violent revolution. The peace and love branch of counterculture is gone. The dream of the 1960s is over. For any person who believed in giving peace a chance, seeing this violence, division, and greed was terribly distressing. Add this disillusionment onto the business and interpersonal stresses of John's life, no wonder he was abusing heroin. Something had to change. In 1970, Freudian psychologist Arthur Janov, or Janov, I've heard it pronounced both ways, sends his primal scream. No, not that one. Book for John and Yoko to review. It resonates with John because Yoko screamed all the time.
Anything you say, dear.
John! John!
Quote, in a nutshell, primal therapy allowed us to feel things continually, and usually those feelings make you cry. That's all. Think about how we handled men's mental health in 1970. Men hardly have outlets to talk about their feelings or cry openly now. In 2026, John desperately needed a companion outlet to music, and that became Primal Scream therapy. Primal Scream dredged up a lot of deep-seated shit, and ultimately the source of John's anger. His unstable childhood. His father walked out on him, his mother handed him off to his Aunt Mimi. Just when John and Julia repaired their relationship, she was killed by a drunk driver. Janov said John had an enormous amount of pain, just enormous. I've seen an awful lot. I don't think I've ever seen an equal. You know, it was a terrible thing, but it was also a good thing, because it just drove him. Yoko said the primal scream was like a mirror, and he was looking at the mirror. John wrote the vast majority of what would become Plastic Ono Band while in Primal Scream therapy. Screaming carried over into the music. He'd do Mother at the end of every day. John played piano more on this record, since it was an instrument he was less comfortable on. He's renounced the Beatles, and he's returned to his own origins as a musician. Rock and roll. Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley. That's what happens when you return to your childhood. You start listening to all that music again. Since this was such a vulnerable body of work, and the Plastic Ono Band could be whatever John wanted, he chose people he knew and was comfortable with. Klaus Voormann was part of the lineup in Toronto. No Eric Clapton this time. He was too busy being obsessed with his best friend's wife. Ringo was the obvious choice for drummer. Billy Preston came around. Of course, there's Yoko. Mal Evans is credited on the record as bringing tea and sympathy, and Phil Spector was tapped to produce. He'd been around since Let It Be, and he'd worked with John on his Instant Karma single. But Phil goes MIA. Ringo said, quote, "I have no real memory of Phil producing this record at all. I remember he came in later." Phil went off the fucking deep end. After All Things Must Pass, his substance abuse intensified, his abuse of his wife intensified. He became a recluse, only occasionally popping out to co-produce George's concert for Bangladesh and hold his musicians at gunpoint. Engineer John Leckie had to step in and produce Plastic Ono Band. John had to step in and produce Plastic Ono Band. Even Yoko had to produce, according to John. Things got so bad. John took out an ad in the October 3rd, 1970 issue of Billboard magazine that said, "Phil, John is ready this weekend!" Thankfully, the music on Plastic Ono Band is straightforward. Ringo remembered. John would sit there and sing them, and we would just sort of jam, and then we'd find out how they would sort of go when we did them. It was very loose, actually. Klaus also remembered a loose atmosphere, but as you can imagine from the sensitive material, John's moods were all over the place. Peter Dodgett's text describes dramatic mood swings, and honestly, I don't blame him. The track listing of Plastic Ono Band goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Mother, followed by Hold On. Then I Found Out, next Working Class Hero, and side 1 closes with Isolation. Opening up side 2, we have Remember, followed by Love. Then Well, 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 Look at Me, God, and the album closes with My Mummy's Dead. Plastic Ono Band was released in December of 1970, mere weeks after George's monster All Things Must Pass. This did affect Plastic Ono Band's chart performance and perception. All Things Must Pass was huge, in every sense of the word. And the marks for this record were all over the place. Rolling Stone praised it, of course, in a double review with Yoko's Plastic Ono Band. Dave Marsh of Cream was positive, but not unyieldingly so. He called out John's activism as elitist and actually praised Yoko's influence on the project. A man praising Yoko Ono in the music press in 1971? What is this? And then you have Jeffrey Cannon of The Guardian comparing Plastic Ono Band to McCartney, which was a death sentence in 1970. McCartney is the work of a man of air. It has no substance. Paul reveals himself in it as a man preoccupied with himself and his own situation. The music is beautifully casual, scraps of his home studio. He seems to believe that anything that comes into his head is worth having. And he's wrong. John isn't preoccupied with himself. He's obsessed with himself. Self-obsessed or groundbreaking, Plastic Ono Band was deemed a challenging listen across the board. Not for pleasure. Apart from Cold Turkey and Give Peace a Chance, the promo single for this package was Mother? Listen, you couldn't tell John Lennon in 1970 He had a spat with EMI over the 2 F-bombs in Working Class Hero. They let him release the song as is, but it had to be censored on the packaging. As if this album needed any more press, the fledgling Rolling Stone magazine publishes a 2-part interview with John and Yoko across their January 21st and February 4th, 1971 issues. Conducted in 2 halves, 5 months apart by a then 24-year-old Jan Wenner. The popularity of these interviews pushed Rolling Stone from this cool counterculture magazine where you could read essays by Hunter S. Thompson to the mainstream music press. Since it might have been a while since you've read Lennon Remembers, allow me to refresh your memory. John was pissed. All that anger Primal Therapy dredged up is still fresh in this interview. He's also angry at being boxed in with the rest of the Beatles still. You get some proper unhinged shit out of context. See Magical Misery Tour.
If I could be a fisherman, I would, but I can't because I'm a fucking genius!
He felt the whole world was against him and Yoko. His ex-bandmates, Peter Brown and Neil Aspinall, the press, everyone. Like he had with most every other father figure in his life, John had a messy falling out with Yanov. He brought a camera crew into one of John and Yoko's therapy sessions. John rightfully got pissed and said, hell no. Lest we not forget that after granting Esquire magazine an exclusive interview, they published, reading from the caption ad verbatim, Renand exclusive gloopy, a racist caricature of Yoko, with John as a bug on a leash. The other major thing that sticks out to me about Lennon Remembers is that, good grief, Jan was in over his head. He kept trying to steer the conversation to the Beatles, to Paul, to George, to the Rolling Stones, when John just wanted to talk about his own fucking album. John repeatedly says things to the tune of, "I can't speak for the others. I don't know how Paul feels. I'm not in his head." In the immediate aftermath, in this interview, John confessed his feelings towards Plastic Ono Band were always in flux. Sometimes I can hear it and be embarrassed, just by the performance or by the music or by the instruments, and sometimes I don't. I change daily. He also said this was the best thing he'd ever done. Then you have the 1980 Playboy interviews, his first in 5 years at that point. I've already quoted them quite a bit in this video. They're conducted by David Sheff, much less angry, and John provides insight to what was going on in his head at the time of Plastic Ono Band, how he feels now, in 1980, what's changed, and what stayed the same. The interview is most famous for him going through all the Beatles songs and saying which ones he wrote and what they were about. He did this with the Imagine LP and Double Fantasy, and he was set to do the rest of his discography in a fourth part of the interview. But John was killed before he could do it. He never got to revisit Plastic Ono Band 10 years out with David Sheff, and I really wish he had. Today, Plastic Ono Band stands as one of the great solo Beatles records, up there with All Things Must Pass and now, after a critical reevaluation, Ram. Plastic Ono Band ranks somewhere on every edition of Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time list. It's consistently in the top 5 of publications' Beatles solo album rankings. Of course, Rolling Stone continually worships Plastic Ono Band. Jan Wenner worships the ground John walked on, and now Jan's son Gus is Rolling Stone's executive chairman. Insert my gripes with the never-ending classic rock nostalgia cycle here, and in 2016, former child actor Corey Feldman covered Working Class Hero as the closing track on what is perhaps the worst album of the century so far, Angelic to the Core. If there is ever a vinyl pressing of Angelic to the Core, I will be first in line to buy. What do I think of Plastic Ono Band? Forgive me if I reference my notes a lot in this section. There are a lot of points that I do not want to miss, especially when we get to talking about John Lennon. Because you can't talk about Plastic Ono Band without talking about John Lennon, the man. This is, maybe more than any of his other records, an artifact of John. My favorite Beatle always has been and always will be George. It's George for me, all the way. His voice, his guitar playing, the sitar, the style, how his music is devoted and opens up the spiritual world. George is it for me. But if you ask me what Beatle I am the most like, it's interesting that the Beatle that found his purpose through God and the Beatle who said God is a concept by which we measure our pain are the two Beatles I gravitate towards. I believe both of their philosophies, right? I hesitate to call it God because of the human factor, but I do believe in something bigger than us, and I believe humans need to have something bigger than us to survive. It's one of the things that makes us human and not featherless bipedal animals. But I also believe that as humans, we really conceptualize this higher power as a way to exercise our own pain. Onto the record. John wanted to do Plastic Ono Band simple and straight. This is absolutely a rejection of all of the bells and whistles on Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, Abbey Road, and Let It Be. Pretty ironic considering Phil Spector was producing this record and he was the one who horked up Let It Be. John wrote similar confessional songs for Imagine. Where is it? There we go. Imagine. Imagine there's no Mondays. Imagine all the people. John called Imagine Plastic Ono Band with chocolate coating. The lack of chocolate coating is why I like Plastic Ono Band so much. If you know my taste by now, if you've been around here for a while, you know my taste leans towards the abrasive and difficult to digest. I like albums with fiber. Case in point, one of the most uncomfortable listens on the whole of Plastic Ono Band, Mother. The album begins with 30 seconds of funereal, slowed down bells. John heard a similar sound effect in a horror movie on TV. This guy loved the tube and wanted the same opening his record. This is the death knell of the Beatles. It's John singing for himself right now. Julia, off the White Album, and Mother are two sides of the same Mother song coin. Julia is a soft, gentle lullaby. And it's not even really about Julia at all, it's more about missing Yoko. Mother is actually about John's mother and his father. It's a stark and honest expression of perhaps the core reason why John did the things he did and why he sought the people out that he did. It's a harrowing listen. The simple lyrics force you to confront what John was forced to confront in therapy. Mother, you had me, but I never had you. I needed you, you didn't need me. Sure, John was in the biggest band in the world. He was the most famous man in the world, but no amount of money or fame will ever fill the gaping hole being abandoned by both of your parents leaves in your very sense of self. You'd think John would have recognized this and not abandoned his own son, but there you go. The hypocrisy of John Lennon. The first people we model ourselves after are our parents. What do you do when you don't have those models? We hear that in John's stomach-churning screams. The screams are isolated by an engineer in the classic album's installation on Plastic Ono Band. It's too much. They need the music there to be the buffers for the listener. Next is Hold On, a centering exercise in song. When John is overwhelmed, he soothes himself as a partner or a parent might. Hold on, John. John, hold on. It's gonna be alright. You're gonna win the fight. This is pretty self-explanatory. John felt like he was fighting everyone in the world except for Yoko. Hold on, Yoko. Yoko, hold on. It's gonna be alright. You're gonna make the flight. A common gripe with John's music at this time is that it's all about Yoko. But I don't see the same complaint with Paul's music at this time. That was all about Linda. We seem to forget that my girl, Linda, the vegetarian queen, you people put her through it in the 1970s. People blamed her and Yoko for the breakup. When you look at John's music at this time, this is a man with attachment issues, digging his honeymoon phase heels in, asserting his love for the woman he believed saved him from a life of mundanity. Always an advocate for utopia, John assures the world. Hold on, world, hold on. It's gonna be alright. You're gonna see the light. It didn't seem like we'd be alright in 1970 with Vietnam and now Cambodia. Shit was dark. But as a wise man once said, if it's not okay, it's not the end. We'll get nowhere if we don't reach a hand out. When you're one, really one, well, you'll get things done like they've never been done. Hold On is breezy and summery, like the front cover of Plastic Ono Band. It reminds me of what Fleetwood Mac were doing. John slaps some hazy reverb on his guitar, Ringo keeps it simple and tasteful with the drums, and Klaus plays chords on the bass. Why? Cookie. To be completely honest with you, I think this was John's vocal stim of the day.
I'm now your host for this evening. The Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones.
The Rolling Stones.
The Boney Rolls.
There's a lot of idol killing on this album. The most famous example comes later. I Found Out lists all the people John has seen right through. I told you before, stay away from my door. Beatle fans would often show up at the guys' houses wanting photos. Sometimes they would break in. The freaks on the phone won't leave me alone, so don't give me that brother. He was getting hounded by the press, getting constant phone calls for comment on this thing or that thing John and Yoko did. Look what they did this time, isn't it so crazy? What exactly has John found out? Now that I showed you what I've been through, don't take nobody's word what you can do. There ain't no Jesus gonna come from the sky. Now that I found out, I know I can cry. No leader, guru, or messiah guided him to the answers. Primal Therapy did. He sees these as frivolous distractions. The answer lies within. You've gotta have your own autonomy. No one can harm you. Feel your own pain. Musically, I Found Out is a return to rock and roll. It reminds me of the chugging guitar sound that Sun Records artists like to use in the 50s. I don't know, man. I've already pissed off everyone watching this video by even daring to halfway defend Yoko Ono. This is sure to be one of my molten hot takes that I will get comments on years out. I want to like Working Class Hero. I really do. On paper, it works. It's the tragedy of a man who's told, in theory, he could have it all, and shown at every possible turn that not only can he not have it all, he will not have it all. Capitalism, man. The working class hero is abused at home, subject to corporal punishment in school, taught to be a dog in the workforce, and forced to conform. Not to mention he's distracted by drugs and TV, so he won't revolt. Quote, everybody is too scared to deal with children all the time, so we reject them and send them away and torture them. The ones that survive are the conformists. Their bodies are cut to the size of the suits. Like, all of this is so on the money for me. I agree. But in the almost 56 years since this album's release, Working Class Hero has become the anthem for the worst kind of John fans. And I do not associate with them. Hare Krishna, peace and love. It's the last line. If you want to be a hero, well, just follow me. This is not John telling his fans to follow him. He's rallying his listeners to follow his example, to resist conformity and follow your own path. But I don't know. I feel like the Dylan-esque style of this song is equal parts hypocritical and self-righteous. I don't know. Working Class Hero just doesn't land with me like I feel it totally should. One of the other main critiques I see of Plastic Ono Band is from people on their high horses saying it's narcissistic garbage. Why does he whine so much? He was a Beatle! John peels back the curtain on isolation, showing us normal folk how isolating fame can be. Fame is weird. Everybody thinks they know you, but no one knows you. You're in the proximity of a lot of people and scrutinized by even more, but you let very few people close. Maybe the only people who truly know you are the people who knew you before this crazy thing. You know, the acting or the singing or whatever you do. The TikTok dancing. I don't know. Kids these days. It's an alienating experience and it's positively unnatural. We didn't have to deal with this fame thing 125 years ago. Despite their big and naive dreams as just a boy and a little girl trying to change the whole wide world, John confesses he and Yoko have the same fears as everybody else. We're afraid to be alone. Everybody got to have a home. It's not a flawless song, but the music is wonderful. It's classic John with the lofty ascending chords, and one of the spots on the record I can actually hear Phil Spector's influence. When Spector was good, he was really good. So I appreciate Ringo's drumming. He is the fucking click. Remember also passes me by. The vague rewrite of a Sam Cooke song misses me.
And money too.
It's a rare humorous spot on Plastic Ono Band, though. Remember the 5th of November, and the explosion sound effect was just John taking the piss. But I don't know. Against the rest of this material, it feels mismatched to me. How can I give love when I don't know what it is I'm giving? Love is the first quiet, intimate moment on Plastic Ono Band. It feels like dropping in on John at home in the bright early morning. The piano fills the room, and the gentle guitar allows us to exhale. The soft arrangement cradles you, as will the lyrics. In this tender, gentle space, John defines what we give when we give love. Love is feeling love. Love is wanting to be loved. Love is touch. Love is reaching out. Love is asking to be loved. Love is needing to be loved. You don't even need to have another person to feel love. Love is free. Love is giving. John says all of this simply and with such certainty. My favorite love songs are the ones that are unsure. This one is an exception. Never one to be vulnerable for long, John gives us a kick in the pants with Well, Well, Well. John's guitar is hot, and Klaus's bass is urgent, giving John a place to do some of his nice rock and roll wails. He was good at screaming long before Yanov. And then we have Look at Me, which has always been my favorite song on Plastic Ono Band for similar reasons that love is dear to me. Last summer, when I was lonely and sad and unsure of my place in the world or whatever, at night I'd pop my window open, I'd lay in the window, and I'd stargaze. Look at Me was on that playlist, as was The Cure, and Sun Kill Moon, and a whole lot of OMD. The gorgeous clawhammer finger-picking rocks you back and forth. Shout out to my boy Donovan for teaching John this technique in India. No wonder I love Look at Me. It's an India song. We have some really lovely double-tracked vocals. John hated the sound of his own voice, and one of the remedies was double tracking. It became his signature thing. Barely splits at the end of each phrase, and the words never fully line up. Look at Me puts a voice to the inner child that we so desperately try to please. Look at me. What am I supposed to be? Here I am. What am I supposed to do? Who am I? Nobody knows but me. Nobody else can see. Just you and me. You guys know a fair bit about me. You know that I'm 26 years old and I studied art history in college and I have a lot of records and I have a show called Vinyl Monday. You know a lot about me, but you don't know anything about me. I'm the only one who truly knows me, even in my closest interpersonal relationships, and that is absolutely by design. But hell, I don't know me either. One of the few lines in Look at Me that isn't a question, the line that kills me, is John pleading, "Please look at me." In case you can't tell by everything that happens here every week, I wasn't properly socialized as a child. I was a weird kid at school, and I was a difficult child at home. My first memories are of being isolated, ostracized, and abandoned by, it felt like, everyone. I struggled to stabilize my core sense of self as a child. The song concludes with the question both the inner child and the adult ask after a lifetime of struggling with stabilizing the inner self. Who are we? God is a concept by which we measure our pain. John wasn't an atheist. He hated the labels of ist and ism, so I won't say this is an atheist definition of God. It's a human definition. Quote, "Our pain is the pain we go through all the time. You're born in pain, and pain is what we're in most of the time. And I think that the bigger the pain, the more gods we need." We see this in John's never-ending procession of father figures, the Brian Epsteins, the Maharishis, Yanov, all the isms, bagism, shagism, dragism, madism, bragism, tagism, ism. He's renounced it all on God From religion, the Bible, the I Ching, the Buddha, the Gita, yoga, to the mantic arts. Magic. I don't believe in tarot. Yoko very much believed in that. He doesn't believe in idols, good or bad, name-checking both Kennedy and Hitler. He doesn't believe in kings of any kind, including Elvis and Dylan, whom he deliberately calls by his real last name Zimmerman. John was going to leave a blank in the song, I don't believe in, and then a period of silence, so the listener could fill in whatever they don't believe in. Hell, you could even say you don't believe in Lennon, and John would have been cool with that. Finally, the thesis of the record. I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me. The Beatles sacrificed their youth to the Beatles, right? George had been playing with John and Paul since he was 14. Over and over again, John said the Beatles as we see them were a myth. 10 years after the breakup, he said, why should the Beatles give more? Didn't they give everything on God's earth for 10 years? Didn't they give themselves? Didn't they give all? People wanting a Beatles reunion didn't want it for the Beatles. They wanted it for themselves. I will talk about the Beatles forever and ever. I will discuss them intellectually and what they mean and what they don't mean. That doesn't bother me. What does bother me is the idea that people think we can recreate it for them. I mean, forget about that. Listen to the Beatles records, but dig Queen or Clash or whatever is going on now. I read a review of this album that said I Just Believe in Me was narcissistic and ruined the song. No, that line is necessary. As a fan of classic rock, I see a lot of fans in this space stuck. They don't want their heroes to grow up. The classic rock nostalgia cycle certainly doesn't help this. A lot of our heroes won't move on because their financial security is so wrapped up in their triumphs from half a century ago. They'll do this as long as people are willing to shell out for the fourth farewell for real this time tour. John asserted he wasn't John Beatle. He wasn't doing anything for the Beatles fan anymore. He was just John, doing things for John. He believes in him, Yoko and him. The dream is over. The other thesis of Plastic Ono Band. As for the music, perfect arrangement, one of my favorites on any John song. Billy Preston kills it on the piano. He hits all the emotional marks, especially in me. Right there. The dream is over would have been a perfect closing line for Plastic Ono Band, but John had to wreck that movie script ending and tack My Mummy's Dead on the end. It's lo-fi, and with John's sing-song cadence, it's childlike. It's uncomfortable and voyeuristic for the listener, so kind of perfect for Plastic Ono Band, and it is effective, but I think it weakens the impact of Mother. The Jan Wenners, Grail Marcuses, and Anthony DeCurtises of the world praise Plastic Ono Band for all the wrong reasons. They praise it because John Lennon made it, because John Lennon was a genius, and because John Lennon is dead. These people think John Lennon is a genius because John Lennon is dead. I praise Plastic Ono Band because it's rough, it's risky, and it's raw. That is where I see the genius. I am not blinded by the man. John. Here we are. Let's get into John Lennon. John was riddled with contradiction. He was a cynic and a dreamer. He was an absent father, even though he'd experienced his own father's absence, and intimately knew the kind of hurt that caused. He used to be cruel to his woman and beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved while calling for peace and all you need is love. He aired out his dirty laundry to the point of self-flagellation. We wouldn't know about any of his mistakes had he not told us in his songs. He aired himself out to the world so we could learn from his mistakes because at his core, John wanted to save the world. That's the thing with John, right? He has a very complicated legacy because he didn't get that time that Paul, George, and Ringo had to, clean up their legacies. We just live with John as he is. Complicated, tough, difficult to love. Though John made generational missteps, he made efforts to better himself. That's what Plastic Ono Band is. It's the product of him trying to figure out why he was the way he was. Jay Cox, yes, that was his real legal name, wrote in Time magazine that some of the best Lennon Ono art was their life. Plastic Ono Band is John's life, taking stock of his first 30 years and holding nothing back. John threw himself headlong into whatever he did, being a Beatle, being with Yoko, world peace, activism, politics, macrobiotic foods, even baking bread. John didn't half-ass anything, and if he forgot the words, he kept f***ing singing. That's the quality of Plastic Ono Band I admire the most. My favorite part of rock and roll, and the reason why Vinyl Monday exists, really, is the human element. And damn if this album is not incredible insight to the human element. He stripped the music back completely to just him, Klaus, and Ringo most of the time, so you have to listen to his anguish and his words. He kills illusions of fame, pop stardom, religions, messiahs, drugs, distractions, and answers. The dream is over. The Beatles had to die for this album to exist. None of this could have ever been released under the Beatles name. Could you imagine the Beatles doing Mother? Hell no! John has purged himself of everything on this record, and from now on, he'll follow him. Plastic Ono Band is brilliant because John Lennon was singing for his life. My personal favorites off this one are Mother, Hold On, Love, Look at Me, and God. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is the last episode before our mid-season special, the first solo Beatles anything I'm covering in 2 years. That was Plastic Ono Band. What do you think of this album? What do you think of John Lennon? Oh god, do I want to ask that question? I know how you people get. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love, and remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday, Monday mornings at 11, a new episode of the Dolls podcast every other Friday at noon, and if you so choose, you can join the freaking peanut gallery by becoming a member of my Patreon, linked in the description. It gives a little extra support to what I do. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys for the mid-season. Bye!